Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Today I'm going to be bringing to you guys the full series of What If Deku was the Red X. Now before I get into this video, quickly I need to do a little bit of a shameless plug. This video is sponsored by me. Okay, this video is sponsored by me. I made a second channel and it's great. I finally uploaded my first non-What If video, so it would mean the world if you guys could go check that out. It's a review on Big Hero 6, revisiting it all these years later and giving my opinions on what I think of it now versus what I thought of it so many years ago. So go check it out if you guys actually support me, but if you don't, it's fine too. Just watch this video, enjoy it and all that stuff. But with nothing else to say, make sure you do all the YouTube stuff, like the video, yada yada yada, and enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
This video is going to be going under the assumption that All For One is the father of Izuku Midoriya. So do please remember that. Okay, so the way that this all is going to start off is just Inko and Hisashi Midoriya, aka All For One, would meet. Now, this happens just like many normal couples. They end up dating, they end up falling in love, quote unquote. All For One, not really. Inko is the main one. And All For One ends up accidentally spilling his juice inside of Inko. So Inko now has to bear with a child, and that child would be Izuku Midoriya. When all of this would be happening, All For One, once Izuku would end up growing up a little bit more, would end up finally having his encounter against All Might. The same encounter that would forever end up hindering him from using the full capabilities of One For All. So with that being the case, Izuku would eventually end up growing up alongside his mother Inko, and one day, Izuku would hear a scream at the kitchen. He then sees a man with a mask on, and Inko would be asking what in the world he's doing here, who he is, why he thinks he's coming into the house, and Hisashi, aka All For One, would reveal that he was one of the biggest mastermind villains, the one responsible for the close death of All Might. Izuku doesn't really hear any of this stuff, but ultimately he can pretty much just hear All For One getting slapped and Inko kicking him out of the house, saying that she never wants to see him again. Tears would begin pouring from her face as she would stare at Izuku, and Izuku would stare right back at her, and she just looks at him and would say that she hates the look of his face. Like, why does he look so much like him? And Izuku would be confused because his whole life, Inko has loved the fact that Izuku looked just like his dad, but now she hates it. And Izuku would look at Inko with this just look of like, mom, like what's wrong? But Inko ultimately would like throw like I don't know, like a pan at Izuku and would say, get away from me, you monster. As from here, Izuku would like be thrown aback. He's like, mom, like what are you? But Inko just kicks him out. She literally just says, get out of here. So Izuku is just outside in the streets and he thinks to himself, I'll just go to Bakugo's house. He makes his way there, and after walking for about 1 hour, he would find himself outside of the Katsuki residence. Knocking on the door, Izuku would end up seeing Bakugo there, and he would tell Bakugo everything about how he got kicked out and how his mom hates him now or something. And Bakugo would laugh, saying that he's not in the mood for pranks, leaving Deku to just sit there outside and wonder why his best friend, quote unquote, isn't helping him. So Izuku finally decides that he's not gonna get helped. He finally realizes that nobody's gonna be there for him. And so Izuku finally has to realize that he has to take matters into his own hands. Nobody's gonna hold Izuku by the hand, so Izuku has to be the one responsible for his own saving. And so what does Izuku do? Izuku just makes his way towards an alleyway where there he finds some random food, and he makes his way towards the street pretty much just begging for money. A bunch of people would feel bad for him, and Izuku would survive for a couple of months on the streets, going from place to place and just honestly hopping around at different shelters for kids, but ultimately they all treat him terribly, and he's far better off on the streets than he would be at the shelters. His quirklessness would make him a prime target, And seeing as all the kids are competing to try to get adopted by different families, they all brutally pick on him and put him down as much as possible. Anytime that a family would come in and show slight interest in Izuku, somebody would come in and say, "Oh, you don't want him, he's quirkless." And Izuku would honestly just have one of the roughest upbringings. This would lead Izuku towards becoming a little bit of a thief. And one day, Izuku would end up spotting some random bike. Like, it's this really cool looking bike and it has this like X on it, right? And Izuku sees it and he's just in this random alleyway in Japan. And he rushes over towards it and decides that his best bet is to just steal these tires and make a run for it, right? So he decides to start taking one, and it'd be at this moment that some other man would end up coming in with the same idea and would push Deku to the ground, telling him to get lost, that he's going to be the one robbing this. As from here, he would begin trying to pick the lock, and Izuku would say, "What are you doing? You can't do that," you know? And, he like lunges at this man, but this man punches Deku in the face, sending him flying to the ground. And suddenly, we would have this older man make his presence known, as he would ask the new thief, what his intentions are with his bike, and to get his dirty, filthy paws off of it. The man would turn towards him and tell him that he doesn't want the problems, to just let him take it, or else he's gonna die. And you know what Red X would say? He would say, You're gonna kill me?" From here, he would proceed to pretty much just like wave his hand and like do the come here motion, as the guy would say, "You asked for it." And using his super strength, he would throw a punch at the real Red X, but Red X would simply dodge it, slam him on the ground, and shatter his arm by breaking it in 3 different places. The man would scream out loud, but Red X would simply stomp him in the head and tell him to be quiet. As from here, Izuku, watching all of this go down, would then get picked up by Red X, as he would tell him that bruise looks a little gnarly, telling Izuku to come here with him. And so they get on Red X's bike and would make their way towards his like random lair. He puts a blindfold over Izuku, telling him that he's not allowed to see anything. And so Izuku would make his way there, where Red X would give him a bag of ice, and Izuku would ask him if he could teach him how to fight like he just did. Red X would say that he's not in the market for being a hero or any of those stuff. His vigilante days are over anyways, so he's done with all that. And Izuku would say that life's hard as a quirkless person. And it'd be at this moment that I'm actually going to be saying that it's Jason Todd. I'm going to be using Jason Todd as the Red X, and I'm going to say that he's in this universe and not Batman, but actually, I don't know. We'll see. Okay, we'll see if I'm going to throw in some little Batman, villains, just to really spice up the pot a little bit, But ultimately, Izuku, after questioning him, Jason would feel bad realizing that, he can relate to this kid so much because he actually grew up quirkless as well. He was the only member of the Bat family not to have a quirk. So it was pretty hard on him. And Red X would ask Izuku what he's willing to do for power. Like, how hard is he willing to train? And Izuku would say that he's willing to do anything. After all, it's not like he can do anything other than train. He has no home and his mom already abandoned him. And Red X, hearing that, would remember his old life of crime when he tried to steal the wheels off the Batmobile. So Red X realizes that this kid, he's just like him. And if he could train him properly, and he means properly, not like Batman did, and not make the same mistakes that Bruce did, then maybe, just maybe, there might be hope for this kid. Just because he turned out a complete loser doesn't mean that anybody else has to. So, what does he do? He pretty much just ends up telling the kid that it's now or never. The training starts now, as he begins to beat in a bunch of knowledge on martial arts and using the different weapons on the Red X costume. And eventually Izuku would just train until finally he reaches the age of 14. Now we know that Jason Todd ended up reaching phenomenal levels of like combat training under Batman. So we're going to be saying that a Jason Todd who has been training under Batman, who knows all the tips and tricks, who's friends with Nightwing, who's friends with all that other crazy stuff, would definitely know how to train somebody like Izuku. So what would pretty much end up going down is that Izuku ending up realizing that, he doesn't really have like a lot of choices, would have actually ended up getting like somewhat adopted by Jason. He never really like adopted him legally because he's not like Bruce, but he's kind of his son, if you get what I mean. Like, he raised him, so he's his father. And just to let you guys know, Izuku has no idea that his father is all for one. Just for those of you that are like, wait, does he know? So yeah, he has no idea, and he's been trained by Red X all of these years. He's now 14 years old, and the only thing that Izuku would be thinking to himself is that he wants to be in UA. Izuku decides that what he's going to be basically doing is trying out for the entrance exam, and Red X would advise him against it, saying that hero society is terrible and that he'd be better off being some sort of vigilante. But Izuku goes behind his back and ends up taking the UA entrance exam all the while, and ultimately Izuku would end up passing with flying colors. The written portion would be phenomenal, and the combat portion, Izuku would end up averaging 37 robot points without saving Uraraka like he would have in the original. Those like heroic senses have low-key been dimmed by all the training and hardcore lifestyle that he's had to endure alongside Jason. So ultimately the 0-pointer was simply turned off by Nezu when he realized that a student was actually in grave danger. So essentially what ends up going down is that Izuku's happy, he's pretty proud of himself, and he makes his way back towards Jason, with Jason saying that he knows where he was, and Izuku saying he had to try, with Jason saying of course he did. And of course he went against his will. He was already expecting that. And Izuku would ask, so why didn't you stop me? And Jason just simply says that because he had to learn the hard way. So now he's going to have to realize why he didn't want him to try out. And Izuku's just thinking to himself like, whatever, like, bro, I got 37 points. Like, I'm going to get into this school. But Jason would just be thinking to himself that he's not so sure about that. And ultimately, Izuku would finally end up receiving a letter from the mail saying that his scores were impressive. However, due to his quirkless status, they can't allow him into UA. And Izuku would again, for the 1,000th time, feel the prejudice of people being like people pushing him away just because he's quirkless. Izuku would smash the video on the ground, and he would think to himself that it's not fair. And Jason would say, that's why I never became a hero. As from here, he would go on to look at the direction of Jason and ask him if there's any training he can do now. Like he needs to blow off some steam. And Jason would end up sparring with Deku, ultimately leading Jason to finally feel like it's time. He ends up giving Izuku the Red X costume. And let's just say, 14-year-old Izuku fills it in quite well. Pause! But no, yeah. 14-year-old Izuku would definitely fill in this costume very phenomenally. And so Izuku would pretty much have nothing else to do. Like his whole goal and motive and thing like that was pretty much just becoming the Red X. But now that that opportunity is completely gone and it doesn't look like he's going to be becoming that anytime soon, he doesn't even know what he wants to do with his life anymore, right? Like, what does somebody do who has had their entire goals and dreams crushed by other people? I mean, what other choice does Izuku have? He doesn't have many options. But ultimately, Izuku decides that he's just going to take to vigilantism. And so, for the following next couple of, for the following next couple weeks, Izuku would just continue his vigilante stuff, continuing to take down villains in the nighttime and occasionally run into some heroes who would try to capture him, but it would all be in vain. Aizawa would be one of those who was major in trying to capture the Red X, but he'd be super confused because the Red X hasn't been around for years, and suddenly he just came back. He fights exactly like the videos of old, and they're completely unsure what happened. Like, did he get like rejuvenated or something? Like, what's up with this Red X guy? Does he have some sort of like younger core? Because he was active for like 30-40 years until he finally quit during some incident when All Might and a bunch of heroes actually almost caught him. Luckily, able to use his teleportation, he was able to get out of there, but what are the chances that that would happen again, you know? He was almost caught. And so Jason would end up pretty much telling Izuku that there's a high chance that he'll get caught one of these days, so to take it slow. Izuku ultimately decides that there's nothing, he would rather do than to just keep taking on more villains, because even though Izuku might not be doing it by the book, Izuku cares a lot about the well-being of society, and he cares a lot about the well-being of random people. Izuku is a very I care about a lot of people kind of guy. And eventually Izuku would finally end up meeting the Bat himself, an old version of Bruce Wayne, when Jason would decide to pop in and ask Bruce for a favor, if he can potentially upgrade the Red X suit or something like that. And so Bruce, using his new technology and all this crazy stuff, would end up making the Red X suit even more durable and even more lightweight and even more OP than the one in the original. the X's that he can throw, he has some that are capable of like shocking people, and he has some that are capable of just like stunning them for long enough to the point where they can't move, you know what I mean? He has like so many new things that like the Batman pretty much gives him access to, and he now gains like access to like being able to breathe underwater through his mask, because like Batman adds that. He also adds like warming into it if he ever gets like into a cold area, you know what I mean? He upgrades his cloaking technology to make it even more broken than before, and he upgrades the teleportation range to just be completely broken. Also, the biggest and most like coolest thing that he does is pretty much actually train Izuku himself. For an entire 24 hours, Izuku and the Bats would actually end up training by themselves privately, and Nightwing would stop by. Being an old man himself and actually retired as well, they would all end up kind of like catching up, and Jason would pretty much just be hyping up his prodigy and his new student, Izuku Midoriya. Ultimately though, the happy-good-go-lucky times don't always last forever, and on this particular day that we're going to be jumping to, it would be one of those days where things take a turn for the worst. Izuku would be out on his nightly patrol when suddenly he would end up seeing a random strange mist appear in front of him. Izuku would be confused. He's like, what is that, right? And then a man with white hair and hands all over his face would pop out. Izuku would immediately get into his combat position, and Shigaraki would say in his raspy voice, "So, you're Red X, the one I've been hearing so much about, Kurogiri, let's go." And Kurogiri ends up pretty much warping Izuku into the bar of the villains in the hideout, as Izuku would look around and would pretty much just like take off his mask, saying, "Nice little spot you got here. So, what'd you go through all the trouble of getting me here for?" As Shigaraki would be shocked at the age of the infamous Red X, as Shigaraki would say that he's not the original, is he? And Izuku would say, nah, he's better. From here, he would go over towards the bar area and ask Kurogiri to whip him up a random drink, right? Tequila on the rocks or something like that, right? And so, he would be given that, and Deku would take 2 shots, and 2 more shots, and 3 more shots, ultimately getting slightly buzzed, and then looking at Kurogiri and saying, "So, what do we got to talk about?" And Kurogiri would end up telling him that he's seen a lot of his work and it interests him. They're about to launch a full-out plan to destroy All Might and Hero Society as it stands. No more will the weak be oppressed. Or actually, no, not the weak be oppressed, but no more will villains be outcasted and vigilantes made to look like villains. With them, they can pave way for a new society, a better society, Shigaraki would say. He would then say that the strong would be on top and the weak would get crushed under his boot. And Izuku would like just get angry at the thought of that, saying that so the weak are just going to be put to the side and treated like nothing, like outcasts. And Shigaraki would say, exactly. As from here, Izuku would say he doesn't want a part of any of that, smashing one of the glasses on the ground before then saying he's leaving. And Shigaraki would say that, if he wants to leave, he's not going to stop him. But if he leaves, they will from now on be enemies. And Izuku would laugh, saying, "Trust me, the last person you want as an enemy is me." As from here, Shigaraki would grit his teeth at the thought of the fact that Izuku said that to him, and so Izuku would begin making his way back towards his own area. The last thing he hears was basically Shigaraki saying if he changes his mind, it'll happen in the USJ a couple days from now. And Izuku would just sigh as he thinks to himself that it's whatever, it is what it is. He's sure the heroes can handle it. But as more and more days would go by, Izuku wouldn't be able to get it out of his mind, and for some strange reason, Izuku just kind of feels compelled to help. He doesn't understand why. He's never been like this, but for some reason, that freaking school that rejected him, he just feels like saving it. He's just so angry at this, but he doesn't know where he gets this righteous heart goody-goody thing from, but he knows that if Batman was here, he probably would tell him to help even though he doesn't want to. Because sometimes as a man, you gotta do things you don't want to do, right? And so, Izuku would just decide that ultimately he's gonna help. The day of the attack, Izuku would get all of his gear together, and using the Red X bike, he would drive there. making his way there fast, like faster than you guys could even imagine. And then once there, he would teleport to the top of the USJ roof, looking around only to see that there's a boat with a bunch of like kids on there who were about to get ambushed by a bunch of villains. Red X, thinking fast, would quickly throw an X that could electrocute the water and conduct the electricity through it and would stun all the villains. Landing there on the boat and asking them if they're okay, Suyu would say, "You're Red X, aren't you?" I think I just did the voice wrong. And then Mineta would be like, "Oh, you're the Red X. It's such an honor to meet you. I've studied your work." And Izuku would look at him and say, "Dude, stop the stuttering." As from here, he would then end up telling them that they're on their own from now. And he would just jump all the way in the air, about to fall in the water. Suyu would be about to catch him with his tongue, but Izuku would teleport back onto the mainland and would see Aizawa would actually be struggling with a bunch of villains. Izuku would begin to get side by side with Aizawa and ask him if he needs a little help, as he throws a punch and would knock out one of the villains. Aizawa would say that why is he here? Like, he doesn't belong here. Like, is he here trying to like play some games? Like, is he here trying to kill the students as well? And Izuku would say that he's crazy for that. Izuku's not a villain. He's just a vigilante. That doesn't, just because he doesn't do things by the book doesn't mean that he's evil. And so he would continue facing off against all these villains until Shigaraki would scratch at his neck and say, "It's not fair. Nomu, kill him." Kurigiri would end up teleporting the Nomu in, and the Nomu would blitz at Izuku, throwing an insanely powerful punch, which Aizawa would use as cancellation of quirk ability on the Nomu, and Izuku would only be able to dodge because he can teleport out of the way. From here, Izuku would jump up into the air and throw a bunch of X's at the Nomu, which are supposed to paralyze him, right? But the Nomu just screeches, grabs them, and just throws them off of him, like screeching at Izuku, as Shigaraki laughs and says, "You can't defeat the Nomu. It has been made to kill All Might. There's nothing you can do, Red X." Oh yeah? Well, I beg to differ. Immediately, Deku would teleport out of there and would proceed to get behind Aizawa, telling Aizawa that he needs him to do a favor. Cancel the Nomu's quirks long enough for Izuku to destroy the Nomu and make sure that its regenerative properties don't get in the way of his plan. After this, Deku would lunge up into the air before throwing one of his famed X's at the direction of the Nomu, and the Nomu would have to rip it off of itself. However, right as it's doing that, Deku would transform himself to become invisible, and from here would teleport right in front of the Nomu. The Nomu not being able to realize that Deku's right in front of him, Deku would easily be able to jam an X into the head of the Nomu, causing an electrical fuse to just blow off in the Nomu's head, and Deku would then jump forward before then teleporting off of the Nomu, and the Nomu's head would completely explode. Now, generally speaking, we know that Endeavor has been known to burn off a Nomu's head, and then the Nomus aren't able to regenerate after that. So, taking that same adjustment or taking that same point of view, I'm going to be saying that the Nomu, though it does have insane regenerative properties, I am unfortunately going to have to say that the Nomu just genuinely just could not survive this encounter. And by the way, y'all, just in case y'all are like, okay, Zether might get up. Okay, and all I have to say real quick is I feel like I have to address the leg thing. I mean, like, normally I don't really like tell you guys all about like my personal life, but since this time you have to listen to me, I guess I must. See, y'all, I was playing basketball, right? And I was getting down. Like, I was about to cross someone up and bam, I slipped, and the force of my body trying to do a crossover move led my knee, my right knee, to bend inwards, not outwards, inwards. And then my body couldn't, like, it tried to keep itself upwards. So unfortunately, my body just slammed down on the knee and it bent inwards and it just popped. And then I lay there on the ground in pain and agony, just like the Nomu's about to have to do. So yeah, the Nomu's there and its head is exploded, and Shigaraki is like, "No, Kurigiri, get us out of here." As from here, All Might would end up arriving, and he would say, "I am here." He would realize that Red X was standing right there, and Red X would realize that All Might's there. So he's like, "Aizawa, gotta go. Make sure you don't lie to the feds and tell them that I was here causing trouble, because you know dang well I was here only to help." And then Aizawa would look at him with this expression of just whatever. as Red X teleports off, and All Might would say, "Wait!" But Izuku would have been far gone. Eventually, Izuku would find himself in front of Red X as he would take his mask off and say, "That was tiring." And Red X would look at him before saying, "What did you expect? You were going in to save a bunch of ungrateful heroes." And Izuku would turn back towards him before then saying that, honestly, as much as he knows that those heroes were after him as soon as everything was over, he felt a little happy knowing that he got to save the lives of some up and coming heroes, saying that they're going to be saving the lives of so many other people he won't be able to get to during daytime, or at least whenever he doesn't feel like having to deal with the ops on his back. Red X would sigh before saying when he was young, he might have done a couple of things just like that, but ultimately, he'll get over that phase eventually. He would then end up telling him about another phase that he also had where he just so happened to not be the best person, and Izuku would ask him what he's talking about. Then Red X would say, "Well, before I was the Red X, I was the Red Hood. And well, the things that I did during that time, well, let's not get into it, but let's just say there were a few casualties. And did I cause them? I'm not going to say yes or no, but I'm pretty sure you could connect the dots." Izuku would look at him before saying, "So you've killed tons of people before, right?" And Red Hood would say, "Well, they weren't good people, but yeah, I have." And Izuku would sigh before saying, "Tell me why I'm not surprised." As from here, Red X would look at him and just laugh before then telling him that today his work's done, so just relax or train or whatever. And Izuku would do just that. He relaxes for a couple of hours before then waking up and training for a bunch of hours, before then taking another nap and finding himself in another encounter with a pro hero. Now, this pro hero would go by the name of Manuel, who would have actually ended up catching him after he had saved some guy from getting mugged. And Manuel would look at him and say, "Wait, I'm not gonna..." But Izuku would just get out of there and would leave him with a note saying, "Don't try it, bud." As from here, Izuku would find himself back at the lair and think to himself that this is getting old. He's tired of these shenanigans. Honestly, he wished that those heroes would have just accepted him. That way, he could do these things without having to worry about the ops on his tail every other 5 minutes. So, he gets a plan. What if he looks to Red X and he's sitting on his chair, detective chair, on the big computer, and he says, "Now bear with me. What if I present myself to them with my mask on and we have a bit of a talk? Maybe I let them in on a little secret, like how old I am and the fact that I deserve a pro hero license, I won't kill people, and maybe that way I can slowly earn their trust and potentially get some sort of hero license. Maybe? What do you think?" And Jason would look back at him and say, "You crazy? You really think that's gonna work?" Even Batman, when he was starting his vigilanteism, nobody accepted him. It was only after he saved the city multiple times that people barely had the guts to say that he was somewhat of a hero. And then it took years after that for him to finally be accepted in the public. So what do you think is gonna happen? You just barge on in there and they're just gonna accept you? And Izuku would look back at Reddit and say, "Maybe not, but you know what? It's worth a try. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? They capture me and I go to prison?" Not even as a joke could they do that. I'll just teleport out of there. And Red X would say, "Do whatever he wants. It's not like he's the one under the mask anymore. So whatever he does is Red X is whatever will go down in the legacy. But just make sure he doesn't ruin his legacy too much by becoming too good of a goody two-shoes." As from here, Izuku would laugh and say that, well, if he did become like that, it's for a reason. I mean, he did have Jason training him, and let's just say he's not exactly the Red X that he read upon in his old days. And Jason would laugh before then saying, "Yeah, well, kid, trust me. There's a whole less goody two-shoes in me than there is in you now. So I guess we'll call it even." And Izuku would look at him before saying, "Yeah, whatever," teleporting in directly into the UA quarters. Now, this would be during the week that they would have off, considering everything that would have just happened, and Izuku would be inside of the office of Nezu. Nezu would say, "Ah, Red X, I was not expecting this. You have caught me by surprise. Would you like a tea?" And Red X would say, "Not really. And also, you can spare calling in a bunch of pro heroes. I promise I'm not here to hurt you." Nezu would say, "Oh, well, I already understood that you weren't going to hurt me. Plus, if you did want to, you would have done so already, so I'm not scared." From here, Izuku would say, "Good. Well, then that means I could do this." As from here, he would turn off his voice changer for a second and say, "Hey, well, this is the real me. Just know I'm not a villain. And if anything, I'm tired of getting chased around. You heroes are always after my tail, and I'm honestly getting sick of it. Is there any way that I could potentially get some sort of hero license? I mean, couldn't you just say that you guys trained me or something like that? Maybe that way I can get off, the record or something. And Nezu would look at him before saying, unfortunately, there's nothing he could really do at the moment. But maybe, just maybe, if he were to become enrolled in the school or something, or maybe just put under the alias Red X, the people might accept him. What if he crashed the UA Sports Festival and showed everybody that he's the best? At the end, there will be a 1v1 battle, and potentially if he were to defeat the winner of that, maybe he could say that he's deserving of a pro hero license. Maybe I could even rile up the crowd and make it seem like you were there out of nowhere and that you're just going to be some sort of surprise contestant. Maybe afterwards you can set up some sort of arrangement saying that maybe if you beat our #1 hero, you're entitled to a hero license or something. That's as good of a plan as I can come up with on the spot. And Izuku, after hearing this, would think to himself that that's actually an incredible idea. How did Nezu come up with that so fast? Nezu would look at him and sip his tea before then saying that it's just the luck of the draw or something. And from here, Izuku would turn back towards Nezu before smiling under his mask, not Ender, but under his mask, and then ultimately saying that he's the best, that he'll catch him later at the sports festival, and that he better not be trying to trick him, because if he is, then trust, all hell's gonna break loose in that sports festival. As Nezu would say, my, I wouldn't dream of it. I will see you around, Red X, or should I say, before Izuku would teleport out, and Izuku wouldn't catch what he said, but he would think that he said his name, considering he said I. But nope, Nezu doesn't know Izuku's name. Honestly, there is no real way for him to know his real name, and he was just going to use a different word that started with an I. He was actually going to say I'm having a mental breakdown right now in terms of like the words I can use. So let's just say that he was going to say something else that sounded like Izuku Midoriya, but it's not, which led Izuku to start freaking out and being like, Jason, I think that they know my identity. Like, how is this possible? I've never been out to the general public without my mask on, and nobody has ever managed to unmask me. I'm flawless. I don't just go around and leave evidence. How could this have happened? And Jason says that he's probably just hearing things. There's no way that they could have caught him. I mean, he did train him. Plus, Izuku, from what he has told him and from all the mission reports and from all the files that he's dug up, there's no information on him anywhere. If anything, his record's dead. And if anybody did think that it was Izuku Midoriya, well, they'd have to just kind of go off the assumption that that kid's dead. Hasn't been on the record, hasn't attended school, hasn't really done anything for years. There's no real way that he could have known it was you, kid. I think you're just overreacting or something. But Izuku ultimately would be freaking out and would just train and do a bunch of push-ups, sit-ups, and whatever, trying to get his mind off the whole situation. Ultimately, it wouldn't really work. Eventually, this would lead Izuku to even think twice about showing himself at the sports festival. But ultimately, he decides that the risk to reward ratio actually makes up for it, so he guesses that he might just give it a try. See what all the fuss is about. He tells Jason about the plan, and even though Jason is completely opposed to it, Izuku says that he's too old to stop him anyways, and just teleports out of there. Izuku ultimately would watch as the final battle would take place, and it would be Shoto Todoroki versus Bakugo Katsuki. In the original, we have Bakugo winning because Todoroki had a bit of a mind block, and he would refuse to use his fire side. I think that just like in the original, Todoroki would still refuse to use his fire side, even more so considering that Izuku never even gave him the pep talk. So, once Todoroki isn't off guard and isn't off of his game, with that, I definitely think that even if he was to just use his ice, I'm more than confident enough in saying that Todoroki would completely wash Bakugo if he was to go all out. I mean, using an iceberg the size that he was using against somebody like Sato, or sorry, not Sato, but the guy with the tape quirk, I think that that's more than enough evidence to show that he's definitely more than what he lets on. So Todoroki would ultimately destroy Bakugo, and then the Red X would teleport in the center of the arena. He would then turn towards Todoroki and ask him how easy it was to defeat those students, and Todoroki would just look back at him and say that it was very easy. what's he doing here? And Izuku would say that he's only here to check things out. Plus, it shouldn't matter to him. He's the top dog of UA, right? And Todoroki would stare him down before trying to freeze him, and Izuku would teleport behind him before saying, ultimately chopping him the neck before Todoroki even realized what had gone down. And Izuku would say that this is the kind of, this is the craftsmanship of UA. This is the toughest person they have. The winner of the sports festival is this week. Come on now. Do you guys seriously not have anything better? And a bunch of heroes would get riled up when suddenly All Might would blitz into the center of the arena and say, Red X, we've been searching for you for quite some time. Have you come here to deliberately turn yourself in? And Red X would say, no, that's not what I'm here for at all. Actually, I was here thinking of doing something a little different. See, you're the #1 hero of Japan, and everybody across Japan is watching this broadcast. So I was hoping that we could make a little bit of a deal. Let's say that if I can take down Japan's #1 hero, the ops and the fuss needs to stop getting on my back. Leave me alone. I haven't killed anyone, and all I've done is help for the past couple of years. There's no reason you guys should be on my back as much as you are. So how about this? If I defeat you, I get a hero license, and that's that. The public doesn't need to know about what I do, but I can now do it legally. And All Might would laugh before saying, why should he make a deal? But everybody in the crowd would say, All Might, do it! And people would begin getting riled up, being like, yeah! Ultimately, All Might would laugh and say, well, if that's what the crowd wants, that's what the crowd shall get. Plus Ultra. Immediately, Red X would say, perfect, before then throwing a couple of smoke pellets on the ground, and All Might would simply smirk, thinking to himself, smoke? Seriously? You couldn't come up with nothing better than that? But Izuku would blitz in and would stab All Might on the side of the neck, injecting him with poison that is meant to pretty much stop him from moving and paralyze him. And All Might would immediately punch out all the smoke that was covering his vision, before then saying that was a dastardly move. But what else could he expect from a villain? As from here, Red X would say it's called a vigilante, before then throwing an X on All Might that would become so large he would actually cause All Might to get trapped in it, before then busting out of it. But ultimately, Red X would already be on the case, and using a bow staff, he would actually end up smacking All Might with it all over his body, twirling it, and bang, 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 you know what I mean? Like landing a bunch of blows on All Might with said bow staff, as All Might would then ultimately grab it, snap it with his knee, and grab Izuku with his hand, like literally clenching his face with his palm, right? But Izuku would teleport out of there into the sky, into the very, very high limits of the sky, to a point where All Might can't even breathe, the air so thin, right? And Izuku would say, what's the matter? Getting hard to breathe? As from here, All Might up in the air having struggles breathing, but Izuku would be able to breathe just fine through his mask, would be able to let go of All Might's grip, and ultimately put him in an armbar, leading All Might to crash from all the way in the air, all the way to the ground, or so it would seem, before Red X would use his teleportation to teleport All Might out of bounds, saying that he wins, doesn't he? And All Might would get up after, a decent sized crater would form, and everybody in the stands would just be watching as their #1 hero just got dethroned in front of their eyes. And Red X would say, my name is Red X, and I'm gonna be the new #1 hero. You guys better get used to me. Oh, and I'll expect that hero license sometime this week, before then teleporting out of there and teleporting right beside Jason, before Jason then says, honestly, kid, I knew you could do it. But whether they're actually going to be honest with what they promised you, that's a whole nother thing. So definitely keep your guard up. They might have been just using this as a trap. Izuku's saying maybe, but he just defeated All Might, one of the people that he never would have expected to defeat anytime soon, but now that he's trained this long alongside Jason, he feels like there's nobody he couldn't defeat. And Jason would say, exactly, kid. That's the whole reason I trained you. My protege had to be even better than I was back in the day, and I'm pretty sure it's safe to say that with you defeating him, you might just be. Izuku, however, would find this very amusing, saying to Red X, Might, I've obviously surpassed you in all metrics. I mean, do you really think you could have defeated somebody like All Might back in the day? And Jason would laugh, saying, him? Seriously? You think that highly of him? I would have beat him in an instant. Now, would it have been using dirty tactics? Of course. But that's what you have to do against opponents like him. People like him don't just fall for no reason. Plus, the last time that we had somebody even more powerful than All Might, the whole populace didn't even know about him. He was taken out, sacrificing himself for the better of the earth. His name was Clark. And ultimately, he had to leave because a bunch of threats kept coming to this planet. But his memory will always live on. And I've went toe to toe with even guys like him. So what makes you think that somebody like All Might was incapable of being taken down by me? I could have taken him, but could I have done it as fast as you did? Who knows? Maybe about the same time, if I was in my prime. And from here, Izuku would say, whatever. Look, I get it. You were strong back in the day, and maybe I'll never catch up to you. But with a couple more years, I think it'll be more than safe to say that I will have surpassed you in every way. Jason. We start the rest of the story with Izuku teleporting into the room of Nezu. And Nezu would simply just be sipping his tea. When Deku teleports in about 4 days later, Nezu doesn't even react. He literally just sits there as if he does not care. Matter of fact, Nezu seems annoyed. But ultimately, Deku would say to Nezu that he's here for his license. And Nezu would say, yeah, I've been expecting you. As from here, he would look up in his drawer, grab a license, and give it to Deku. And Deku would ask him, okay, so that's it? Before then Nezu would say, well, that is it, but honestly, I would definitely like to know who that is under the mask. Maybe you could just show me your face or tell me your name, anything. Anything like that would be helpful. I mean, at the end of the day, you are going to be seen by the public eye. And with my connections and the strings that I pulled for you to actually get a hero license, there will be no more need for you to hide your identity, right? So why not just come into the... But Deku would say, no, I'm not doing it. I know what you're trying to do, Nezu. But ultimately, I want my identity to remain a secret. I don't want anybody to know who I am, what my name is, or any of those things. That's my information to keep. So, I think we're going to keep it that way. Nezu would ultimately take a sip and say, very well then. I understand. I won't push any further. Thank you for coming. As from here, Izuku would teleport out of there, but right before, I know I said he would teleport out of there, but that was a poor choice of word. Izuku would be about to teleport out of there is the words that I wanted to use. And it would be at this moment that All Might, he would come into the room as a Small Might form. Deku would look at All Might and say, who's this? And All Might would buff up instantly, shocking Izuku, making him say, looks like you are really a faker. As from here, All Might would go on to inform Izuku of something, and Izuku would ask him what in the world he wants to talk to him about, right? As All Might would say that he defeated him in the sports festival. At first, he was mad, irritated, and even sad. He never expected anybody to be able to defeat him as easily as he did, but after all of that sank in, finally, a realization hit him. And that realization was that he's powerful. And even though he did defeat him in a bit of a villainous way, he gets the job done. When he wasn't there at the USJ, who else came to save the day but him? And during the US Sports Festival, you showed that you are a much better combatant than I am. And that is even without powers, right? Izuku lifts an eyebrow at this underneath his mask and says, what are you getting at, All Might? Before All Might would turn towards Izuku and say that what he's trying to say is that he has something that he can give him, but he would need him to do him a favor. Just take off the mask. And Izuku would say he's crazy for that, but he's gone. But All Might would say, wait, it's a quirk. Haven't you ever wanted to know what it would be like to have a power? Have a quirk? Something that could change the world. Right now you're saving people one at a time, but imagine how much more you could be with my power. And your capabilities, you'd be unstoppable. You may even be along the likes of he who had to leave such a long time ago because of his insane amount of power and the villains that were drawn such a long time ago. And Izuku would say, how do you know about? And All Might would say, come on now, he knows everything hero related, vigilante related, and all of that. So of course he knows. His teacher Nana, she once told him about how she met a man an incredible man long ago. So of course he knows about that. And Izuku ultimately would wait before then asking him how this would work. If he's trying to scam him or trick him or throw him into authorities. And All Might would say none of that. That he would never wish in his wildest dream to do Izuku dirty. The way that this would work, he would say, is simply that Izuku would have to just digest his DNA in some sort of way. And with All Might willing him to actually engage in having the quirk, that's all it is. It's just me wanting to give you my quirk and you ingesting it through DNA. And Izuku would say, so let me guess, you're going to pluck out a hair and say, eat this. He would even do the All Might face. And even though All Might couldn't see Red X's face, he knew that he was doing the All Might face. And All Might would honestly have a laugh at that moment. As All Might would go on to inform Izuku of a villain with not a lot of notoriety, but someone that he's almost positive he's heard about. And Izuku would say, let me guess, you're going to talk about the all-famed All for One, aren't you? And All Might would look at him and say, how did you know? Izuku would say that he's been working on that guy for a couple of weeks now, but ultimately he hasn't found any leads. The guy knows how to cover his tracks pretty well. So, for now, he's just going to find him whenever he does and defeat him. And All Might says, that's just it. With as many quirks as he has, it would be almost impossible for you to defeat him. I mean, you can teleport and you can become invisible, but what's becoming invisible to a man who has infrared vision? And what's teleporting to a man who has barriers that he could place around himself so you can't even get close to him? Look, I understand you're powerful, and I understand that if you truly were to put your mind to this, you could possibly beat him. But just think about how much easier the job would be if you had a quirk like mine. I'm not forcing you to do anything, kid. I'm just telling you the options there. This is what he did to me back in my prime. And All Might would lift up a shirt, show Izuku, and Izuku would be shocked. Like, even through his mask, you can tell that Izuku's wide-eyed. From here, he would say, look, maybe taking off my mask wouldn't be the end of the world. Am I going to tell you my name? No. But I could do this. As from here, Izuku would take his mask off and then would be revealed what Izuku looks like. And All Might would say, wow, you're a lot younger than I expected. It almost appears like you should be a second year or third year in UA. I thought you were an adult. And as would say that from the moment he heard his voice, his real voice that is, he knew that wasn't the case. But with his fighting ability and more time, Izuku could become the greatest hero of all time. And Izuku, after hearing everything that All Might's telling him, would say, sure. Now give me that quirk, All Might. I don't have all day. As from here, All Might would smile and give Izuku the quirk one for all. Izuku from here would say that obviously he wasn't about to deny power, but it's not that he really needs it, but you know, if he has the chance to get stronger, he'll definitely take it. So, after this, Izuku would end up digesting the hair of All Might, and after this would happen, a couple of hours would pass and Izuku would find himself on Dagoma Beach, where All Might would tell him to clench his butt and throw a full-powered punch. And Izuku would think to himself that that might not be the best idea. So he throws a punch at, instead of full power, more like 50% of his strength. And once he would do this, he would create a gigantic tsunami-like wave, which would just completely shock Izuku. Realizing that before, he was strong, he was fast, and he could teleport. But now, with this, there's nobody he couldn't be. He officially surpassed Red X. Whatever metrics you would want to use, he would definitely be able to take him on in combat now, wouldn't he? Even Batman himself. There's nobody else in the Bat family who could possibly light a candle to him now with this ability. He's the strongest, he would think. He would turn to All Might and say that had he done that full power, he probably would have shattered his bones. This quirk is powerful. It shook me up even with half of my power. And All Might would look at him, raise an eyebrow, and ask if he's serious. You know, after all, when All Might got the quirk, he was able to use it off rip. All Might would say that it appears like this quirk is something that just gets stronger every passing successor. And that's why you were still able to use it. But after all this cultivation, there's no way. And so, All Might would look back at Izuku and would say, Understood, young Midoriya. As from here, Izuku would turn towards, he wouldn't say young Midoriya, but he would just say understood, Red X. As from here, he would ask him what he should call him. And Izuku would say, you could just call me Jason. As from here, All Might would call Izuku Jason, and Izuku would kind of like twitch at the thought, before then saying, never mind, don't call me that at all. Just thinking back to his old childhood memories and remembering a name that Bakugo once called him. Call me Deku. As from here, All Might would say, alright, Deku. So, what's the plan? Izuku would say that for the next week, he's going to continue looking into that man one for all, and once he finds out more information on him, he'll be sure to let him know. From here, Izuku would go off, and for the following next 2 weeks, he would search for as much information as he possibly could on this man known as One for All, or All for One. He would even inform Jason of the fact that he became the successor of All Might, and took hold of his quirk. And Jason would be shocked, saying that never has there been anybody alive who has had the ability to swap quirks. And now, with All Might being there, that's incredible. He would go on to tell Izuku that that was an incredible idea, that even though he's not going to turn into some goody two-shoes now, it was great to give himself more power, more leverage, more leeway. Now nobody's going to be able to stop him. And Izuku would say, that's exactly what I thought, before Jason would smack him over the head and say that that's not the right thing. How in the world is he supposed to have fun during combat if nobody's going to be able to test him? He would turn towards Izuku before saying he better have fun when facing this All for One guy, because after that, there's going to be nobody on this planet who's going to be able to give him a challenge. So he better hope, but not really hope, that somebody else extraterrestrial may come and give him the fight that he might just so happen to desire. As Izuku would actually take this into consideration, thinking that that is true. How's he going to have fun during battle now if nobody's going to be able to light a candle to him? Wouldn't everything just get boring? Kind of like Saitama. But ultimately, he brushes it off, thinking to himself that, for a power like this, that might just be a worthwhile price to pay. And so, what we would end up getting is just a moment in which Izuku has this light bulb go over his head and the aha moment finally play. Eventually, Izuku would end up getting a lead so strong that Izuku doesn't even bother to do anything or let anybody know. What Izuku does is he immediately would make his way there, and with all his training and all his weaponry, he would finally make his way to the location, eventually crawling in through the ventilation system, and finally getting a glimpse of the man known as All for One. Izuku from here would drop down right in front of him, and would proceed to ask him what his name is, as All for One would look up, see Red X, and would question what he's doing here. Does he have some sort of death wish smiling under his mask? Izuku would say that his name doesn't matter, but he guesses he could tell him, considering he's gonna die either way. So Red X would proceed to say, name's Izuku Midoriya. And from here, All for One would get this massive grin around his face, saying, you're Midoriya. Interesting. Would your father happen to be named Hisashi Midoriya? And Izuku would think back to his memories and he would say, yeah, so what? How do you know that? As he'd be shocked that All for One has any leads whatsoever towards his past or name at all. He wasn't expecting anything like that. But then, All for One's grin would get wider as he would go on to say, interesting. I haven't seen you since you were a little boy, Izuku. As from here, Izuku would be like, what? And then his voice would change into that of what he remembers his father to be like. As he would say, come on, Izuku, come over here, in a really kind, nice way. And after Izuku would hear that, it would be like his world would shatter around him. Or so All for One would think. Izuku would pretend that this got to him, and he would pretend to go into this trance and freak out and hyperventilate and be like, no, how could you have been a villain? Mom never said anything like that. That must have been why she kicked me out. But that realization would actually hit Izuku like a train. The reason that she didn't want him in the house anymore was because when he was a kid, he looked so much like his father. So much that it probably killed Inko to see him every day, knowing that she ended up marrying one of the greatest villains of all time. and somebody who would potentially go on to do terrible things in the world. They probably ate her alive. That's why she couldn't see me. So it's your fault. It's your fault that I basically had to grow up without a mother. I didn't have any of that because of you. Huh. Well, at least I finally get to get you back, Dad. As from here, all for one would smirk and say, sure. Look, all that is behind us now. Why not, instead of go against me, join me? As my successor, we could take over this world. I saw you defeat All Might in a way that not even I was capable of long ago. But with you and me working together, we would destroy him. There would be nobody that could stand in our way. We could take over this planet and the next planets. And I know that there is such thing as extraterrestrial life. The conquest couldn't stop here. It would go on forever. I could give you eternal youth. Anything. Son, join me. And Izuku would look at All for One before then saying, wow, no wonder. You're batshit crazy. Mom really did know how to pick him, huh? As from here, All for One would say, well, it appears to me like you're clearly not going to choose the right path. So I think I might just have to force you. And Izuku would say, really? Force me? As from here, Izuku's eyes would spark with the energy of One for All, and All for One would feel like he feels shivers down his spine. Izuku teleports right in front of All for One, and I'm not even kidding y'all, like he straight punches All for One through like 4, 5, 6 buildings, teleporting in front of him once again. And after his mask was completely shattered, mind you, he would kick him up into the air so high that thunderclouds would be up there. Like, it's that high. The air would be so thin, and Izuku wouldn't teleport up there. Nah, bro, he jumps up there with the max speed of 50% One for All. As from here, he would look down at All for One, and balling both of his fists up together in a sort of hammer-like way, he would smack him back down to earth, as All for One would leave a mega-sized crater there, and Izuku would stand over him, saying, good riddance, Dad. Although I never did get to have that father and son moment that I always wished I got. At least now I get to know why Mom kicked me out, and why you were just such a piece of garbage. Honestly, it pains me to say that I was born to somebody like you, but I guess you won't be around to know any of that. So from here, Izuku would go on and grab a pistol, and bam, straight shot to the head of All for One, saying he really could have done that at the beginning. And he's not really quite sure why the heroes didn't do that with most of the villains, but Izuku's one of those heroes that he knows when to kill somebody. And All for One, he's one of those people that just, generally speaking, doesn't deserve life. From here, Izuku would make his way back towards the office of All for One, and he would realize that there is a contact under his list that seems relatively important. His name would be that of Dr. Ujiko, and Izuku would decide to check out his place of residence, teleporting inside of some weird lab with a bunch of strange creatures. Deku would look around and see all of this and would question what in the world all this is, but ultimately, he would see this man performing some sick experiment on a human, and he was alive. And Izuku would not be playing games. Izuku just aims his weapon and bam! By the time the Dr. Ujiko realizes it, he turned to dust because it was a fake one. And the real one would be standing behind Izuku, dropping everything in his hands and saying, to get out of here. You know, we'll give him anything he wants. Please just let him live. And so, he would try to call All for One for reinforcements. But ultimately, it just wouldn't work, and Dr. Ujiko would have a bunch of Nomus come out of their tanks, as Izuku would turn towards them and say, you gotta be kidding me. From here, Izuku would proceed to dispose of all the Nomus, as Dr. Ujiko would have tried to run away, and Izuku would teleport in front of him, saying, not so fast. The things you're doing here, it's horrendous, and I think that you ought to be exposed to at least a little bit of what you did to these people. So instead of killing Dr. Ujiko, he straight grabs him and teleports him right in front of Jason, saying to take care of him, that this guy is a Class S criminal, the kind that partake in experiments. Jason would say no more, and so from here, he would proceed to take him towards a chamber where he would torture him in not like gruesome ways, but in ways that would break a man's spirit, like Dr. Ujiko, like in a way to remind him that this is exactly what he did to other people. And this is exactly the way that he's going to go. Because in this world, you get what you give. And now, he's finally getting what he gave for so long. And Dr. Ujiko he perishes from just the fear alone of any more torture having been done to him. Eventually, Izuku would make his way back towards his pad, aka his house, and once there, Izuku would just relax, watch a movie until a couple of months later, 2 months later, he would end up getting a notification on his phone from the heroes, asking him for help. It's an SOS call. Izuku would immediately teleport into the location they tagged, and he would see this gigantic monster-like being, Overhaul, as Izuku would say, seriously, this is what you guys need me for? And a bunch of heroes would be there, facing off against Overhaul's villains and all that. And Izuku would simply sigh before then blitzing in and just straight Saitama-ing Overhaul. Like, he just straight bam, straight to the dome. Bam, bam, bam. Like, we saw original Izuku just beat down on Overhaul. So just imagine that, but like, Izuku's a whole lot stronger. And that's essentially what ends up happening. Overhaul would be taken out completely, and Izuku would stand over him before saying, "Villains like you disgust me." So, good riddance. Stomping out his face before then going over towards Eri, picking her up and saying if she's okay. And Eri would give him like the brightest smile, and Izuku's heart would low-key melt at that. As from here, he says he's gonna get out of the way. He takes Eri towards some random hero, and after this, Izuku would continue on his hero patrol. Everything would be so easy. Might as well be the story of One Punch Man. And that, ladies and gentlemen, would conclude What If Deku Was the Red X? I hope you guys enjoyed this series. Definitely had a lot more going for it than what I originally intended. And I definitely enjoy the recording of part 2 as well as this part. Because for some reason, the feeling of like making a normal what if, it went away. I think it's because it's one of those videos that I've wanted to do for such a long time. The reason that I was able to actually pour low-key some of my heart and soul into this video. So if you guys enjoyed it, it would mean like the absolute world to me. If you guys were to go check out my, but if you guys were to leave a like on this video, and if you guys were to go check out my second channel, where currently I have posted my first ever non-what if video, and honestly, it's pretty fire. So I think you guys would definitely enjoy it if you guys like movies, or if you guys like movie reviews, because that's really much all it is. It's not anime related, but it's just movie content. And it's a well-edited video, so go check it out if you can. But with all that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen, remember one thing. God loves you. Anyways, peace.